The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant, and on today's episode, we are going to be speaking about the upcoming federal election in Canada. Now, you might be thinking, hold on a second, there is no federal election coming. Well, if you're paying attention to the news cycle, you'll see that Justin Trudeau, current Prime Minister of Canada, is already on his campaign tour, making plenty of public appearances. We've covered some of these on our past episodes at droidscanada.com. Go back and have a listen. Also, too, you can go hear some really great content from others on this particular award-winning network. Todd and Dan, have a great listen to them. Hilarious. I will say today's episode will even be more hilarious than anything that they put out in the recent months, because we're talking about China and we're talking about elections and how the government is covering up, potentially, the investigation of foreign interference in democratic elections. Now, we all remember the Trump fiasco and the election irregularities in some key states, some questionable decisions that happened, counting behind closed doors, boxes showing up, voters that had been dead actually voting. But now we're actually going to be talking about actual foreign interference from another country. And it's funny because we'll say Democrats in America, which are the same as liberals in Canada, those progressive people that have left-wing ideas that there should be more government, more and more government, are the first ones to shout that the elections, there are no problems. There's never any problems because the election's benefiting them. And this is one of the problems with Canada, and we'll get into that, and how the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, just do the bidding of the government, and it should be a separate entity. We're going to be reading two articles from the Canadian Communist Broadcasting Corporation. And this article is from February 23rd. Leaks alleging China interfered in 2021 election have, quote, inaccuracies, Trudeau says. Top secret CSIS, which is the equivalent of the FBI, the CIA, documents leaked to the Globe and Mail suggest China sought to ensure a liberal minority. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is questioning the accuracy of recent top secret leaks to the media that allege China interfered in the 2021 election. The Globe and Mail reported last week that secret and top secret documents from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, said Beijing, China government, sought to ensure a liberal minority government and the defeat of several conservative candidates in 2021. A former Chinese consul general in Vancouver bragged about her efforts to defeat two conservative MPs, according to the documents detailed in the Globe story. We are very concerned with the leaks, particularly because there are so many inaccuracies in those leaks, Prime Minister Trudeau told a news conference on Thursday. Since the Globe report emerged, Trudeau has maintained that Canadian voters alone decide the outcome of the last federal election, an assertion he repeated on Thursday. The election integrity held, he said. That does not mean, nor have we ever contended, that there isn't ongoing efforts by countries like China to interfere in our democracies. The Prime Minister didn't specify which part of the leaks are inaccurate. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has accused Justin Trudeau of ignoring Chinese interference. Justin Trudeau knew about this interference and he covered it up because he benefited from it, Poilievre said last week. He did not cite evidence beyond the Globe story. Critics of the government have pressed it to come up with a more aggressive strategy on foreign interference since a global news story last year said CSIS briefed the Prime Minister on Chinese plans to interfere in the 2019 election. Sources cited in the story said China's government covertly funded candidates in the campaign. The government has been pressed to establish foreign agents registry, like those in the United States and Australia. The House of Commons Procedure and House Affairs Committee unanimously agreed on Tuesday to invite Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly and International Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc for another round of questioning. Now, a few years ago, Huawei, and if you recall, the Huawei executive that's held in Vancouver under house arrest was wanted in the United States, but Canada didn't want to extradite her to the United States because China would have implemented serious bans because this particular lady is part of the Communist Party of China. So it was a bit of a diplomatic nightmare for Trudeau in that sense. Huawei was to be given the 5G network in Canada. They had access to a lot of computers that were going into a new Navy ship that was being built. That did not go through. But Huawei also made a lot of donations to the Trudeau Foundation. And that was a few years ago. They were listed on the Canada 150, the 150th anniversary, as a major donor to Canada. Now, Huawei is owned by the communists. Take that as you will, and it seems to be that they throw money around, and also to the Trudeau Foundation, which is Justin Trudeau's father's foundation that he ran and looked after up until he became Prime Minister and then handed it off to somebody else. The committee is also summoning Public Safety Minister Marco Menziato, along with representatives from Elections Canada and the National Security Agencies, including RCMP and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Michael Powell, an associate law professor at the University of Ottawa, told the Canadian press that academic sources, journalists, and Canada's National Security Agency have suggested foreign interference happens in every federal election in Canada now, although its effects remain unclear. It's just hard to measure how people would have otherwise acted absent the foreign interference. Would they have voted differently? Would they have not voted? Powell said. Under federal protocol, there would be a public announcement if a panel of senior bureaucrats determined that an incident or an accumulation of incidents threatened Canada's ability to have a free and fair election. There was no such announcement concerning the 2021 or 2019 elections. Both times the Liberals remained in government with minority mandates, while the Conservatives formed the official opposition. Presumably, they either didn't have the intelligence at the time or they had it and just did not, in their estimation, rise to the level of necessary to make such announcement to the public, Powell said. Several issues have contributed to the current tense relationship between Canada and China, among China's detention of 2 Canadians and Canada's move to ban the Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei from Canadian 5G network. Now, the 2 Canadians are, I believe, they're both named Michael, and they're in for drug-related offenses in China. Now, the term PMO, Prime Minister's Office, they're sort of in charge of handling the affairs of the Prime Minister, will dictate what to do to the other departments. This is not a function that should have happened. However, it has happened. One of the key individuals, Gerald Butts, now former retired bureaucrat, made millions of dollars in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's wings. They've been lifelong friends and studied together and met in university. He was slapped with some serious misdeeds a few years ago, and he retired, and now he's representing Canada on a national level at a global think tank. Now, he's obviously saying in a wonderful tweet, if you ever follow him, I think it's at GM Butts is his Twitter handle. Very hilarious account, as he likes to tell people off that don't follow the mantra of progressivism. The article taken from March 1st, CBC, RCMP not investigating 2021 election meddling allegations, MPs told. A government official confirms the RCMP is not investigating reports of the election interference. This would have been instructed from the Prime Minister's office to say, no, don't look at it. If we go back to the firing of Canada's first Indian Attorney General, she was tasked and was going to look into serious allegations of misdoing from SNC-Lavalin, manufacturers of equipment, and how those awards or how those contracts were awarded. She was going to look into it. The Prime Minister's office said, no, you're not going to look into it. She said, I'm going to, and she was fired for that. So this happens in Canada. The Prime Minister will just say, no, you're not doing it, and nothing gets done. While multiple media reports have detailed allegations of foreign interference, including attempts to co-opt candidates, the top bureaucrats at the Department of Public Safety said Wednesday there are no active RCMP investigations underway to the last election. Quote, I can confirm that the RCMP is not investigating any allegations that are arising from the last election, Sean Tupper, Deputy Minister of the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, told a committee of MPs studying foreign election interference. Jody Thomas, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, this is the one that has no experience being a National Security Advisor, a role that was created because you have ministers that are in charge of these things. This is the one that was afraid of her life. This position should not exist. She told MPs on the Procedure and House Affairs Committee that she and other officials have routinely briefed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about election interference by China. These meetings, these briefings should be held by ministers, not by employed bureaucrats. She called Beijing the greatest threat and other bad actors like Russia and Iran, because apparently Russia is the bad guy. She declined to provide specifics about the interference, saying it would be inappropriate in light of strict national security laws that require secrecy. The unlawful sharing of information and inappropriate sharing of information, I believe, jeopardizes our national security. It jeopardizes institutions and puts people at unnecessary risk. It's very concerning, Thomas told MPs. So really what she's saying is to not have transparent government, to not be open. If there's allegations, they should be known and they should be brought public, and we should get to the bottom of these things. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, remember, he ran on his very first election cycle to be the most open and transparent government. And time again, that is proven that is not the case. And yet again, here we are with another example, because we can go back to the Aga Khan vacation. We can go back to his multiple donations. We can go back to all of his blackface. And we can go back to all of these things where he said he would be open and transparent. And yet again, allegations about an actual country interfering with documents from an institution that's a government institution. No, we're not going to look into it. Don't look over here, people. Don't look over here. Listen to me. I'm a bureaucrat. I know what's best for you. The absence of an active criminal probe does not mean there wasn't serious misconduct by China or other foreign actors in the last two federal campaigns. National security experts have said it's difficult to use intelligence gathered by agencies like CSIS in the course of a criminal matter. The standards in a court of law are different from the standards used in the gathering of intelligence. Conservative MPs on the House Affairs Committee raised concerns about the absence of criminal charges for foreign interference. They suggested the lack of such charges leave the impression that nefarious actors can operate with impunity. Adam Fisher, Director General of Intelligence Assessments at CSIS, said this is an issue that may require a legislative fix. CSIS is even acknowledging that there's a problem going on, and they're saying we have a problem, not just with the election accusations, but they're actually saying take those accusations aside. We do have a problem, and we do need the government to fix it. There is a serious problem here. But yet, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, because he's benefited from this, will just say, no, we're not fixing it. Move on. Move on. Nothing to see over here, folks. Tara Denham is a member of the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, a body set up to monitor election interference. She told MPs that a task force was aware of the anti-conservative messages that were widely distributed on WeChat, a Chinese social media app, during the last election. But Denham said SITE, which is the organization or the body looking after this, couldn't determine whether those messages came from foreign sources. Former Conservative BC MP Kenny Chiu, who has been a vocal critic of China, has said he was the target of propaganda and disinformation on WeChat during the last election campaign. He lost his Vancouver area seat to the Liberal candidate and has claimed China played a role in that defeat. Also, Wednesday, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and the NDP demanded that the federal government launch a public inquiry into allegations that the regime in Beijing interfered in two recent federal elections. Prime Minister Trudeau has so far ducked calls to launch an inquiry, and he has argued the House of Commons committee currently studying interference is the best forum for this sort of investigation. Poilievre said the Commons committee's work must continue and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, should be called to appear before it. But he said the, quote, massive news that Beijing and its agents may have interfered in Canada's democratic process also demands an outside review. He even said an inquiry should be limited to China's allegations. The NDP motion on the matter, meanwhile, calls for an inquiry into a foreign interference in Canada's democratic process. Poilievre said a public inquiry should be chaired by someone who is acceptable to all political parties to ensure its independence. He said a recent report on the matter authorized by Morris Rosenberg was unacceptable because Rosenberg previously held a role with the Trudeau Foundation, a non-profit named for the Prime Minister's father. Poilievre said the Liberal government hasn't done enough to curb Beijing's influence in Canada. Quote, he did one thing. He appointed a panel, and that had a report written by someone who was the former head of the Trudeau Foundation, Poilievre said of the Prime Minister. Quote, that's it. No foreign influence registry, no laws to protect the Canadian community, no action against foreign interference, and no effort to inform the Canadian people that all this was happening to our democracy. Rosenberg's report, released Tuesday, found that the Government of Canada did not detect foreign interference that threatened Canada's ability to hold free and fair elections in 2019 and 2021. The report did say, however, that there were attempts to interfere in both campaigns. Speaking to reporters in BC, Trudeau dodged a question about whether he'd launch a public inquiry. He said that in addition to the Commons Committee, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which operates in secret, is reviewing China's alleged interference. Quote, I think one of the most important things to remember is we have an awful lot of mechanisms that are underway right now around determining what kind of foreign interference has happened is continuing to happen and demonstrating the tools we have, Trudeau said. Canadians can continue to have confidence not just in our national security officials, but in the integrity of our democracies. Canada has a long list of grievances against Beijing. China has been accused of meddling in Canada's election. A Chinese national was mysteriously fired from Canada's National Microbiology Lab. A Chinese national working at Hydroelectric has been criminally charged for alleged economic espionage. China's ambassador threatened MPs and senators with, quote, forceful measures as payback for Parliament describing China's treatment of its Uyghurs minority as genocide. And Beijing arbitrarily detained 2 Canadians for more than 1,000 days. Last fall, Global News reported that Trudeau had been briefed by national security officials about a vast campaign of foreign interference in Canada's politics. A campaign that allegedly included a clandestine network of candidates in the 2019 election, a movement to place agents into the offices of MPs in order to influence policy, an attempt to co-opt and corrupt former Canadian officials to gain leverage in Ottawa, and a campaign to punish Canadian politicians whom the People's Republic of China views as a threat to its interests. CSIS reportedly told Trudeau that China's consulate in Toronto floated cash to at least 11 federal election candidates and numerous Beijing operatives who worked as campaign staffers. Last month, the Globe and Mail reported that China again employed a sophisticated strategy to disrupt Canada's democracy in the 2021 election campaign because Chinese diplomats and their proxies backed the re-election of Justin Trudeau's Liberals. Also in February, Global News reported, citing unnamed sources, that national security officials briefed Trudeau about Liberal MP Hang Dong. The news outlet said CSIS had identified Dong as a witting affiliate in Canada's elections interference networks. Global also reported Dong was one of the 11 candidates allegedly supported by Beijing in the 2019 election. So there you have it, right from the Communist Broadcasting Corporation of Canada, the official news outlet of the government, reporting on potential election interference and naming China and having good authority and good information that this is the case. So what do you think? Do you think that it's fair? Now, what it does not go on to say, and this article does not go on to touch on, is Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, who is also the Finance Minister of Canada as well, who's sitting on the board of directors of the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab is on record in even saying that he has infiltrated much of the world's government, and using those terms to make sure that the World Economic Forum pushes their agenda. So not only do we have a government that is accepting money from China, we have a government that has employed people from the World Economic Forum as Deputy Prime Minister of this country. Is Canada as free as it claims to be? Are the elections as free as they claim to be? What do you think? We'd love to hear you. Reach out to us on all of our social media. And I'd like to thank you for listening to this edition of The Fact Is. I hope you have yourself a great week. I've been your host, Hollis Grant.
Hi, this is Hollis Grant, host of The Fact Is. You can find us Wednesdays on droidscanada.com, where we discuss current affairs from around the world.